As you know, we are in a series called Parables. And we just said simple stories with timeless truths. Parables are stories that Jesus told. Stories have been around a long, long time. But a parable was something, remember we said the word parable literally means to lay down beside. So it is to lay down a story beside a truth to help people understand the truth. And so we have been studying through these and looking at some parables this morning. Brother John asked you a little while ago, if you're awake, raise your hand. I didn't look around. Was it a pretty good representation? A few? Okay. Were there more asleep? Huh. Did you ask if you're comatose? Raise your hand. Maybe we should have added a third category. I don't know. Guys are really, really quiet this morning. Just turn to your neighbor and say, "Hey, are you awake?" Just try it, just real quick. It's okay. Just give him one of these. It's all right. Parables. Brother John told you Luke chapter number 16 is where we're going to be this morning. Luke 16, so you can go ahead and find it and be turning to Luke chapter number 16, because we're going to read through these verses and we're going to walk our way through this parable, through this story this morning. And I love the fact that what we're just saying, ancient words, it is so important for us when we gather together, right, to spend time in God's Word. And so we're going to really closely walk through these verses and look at what this story has to say. And the one that we're going to look at this morning, I've just simply called it the story of the crooked manager. The story of the crooked manager. Now, as we have seen, some of the parables are long, right? This is not uncommon to find a parable that is 15, 16, 18 verses long or more. But some of the parables are short. It's also not uncommon to find a parable that might only be one verse. We looked at one last week. There was only 2 verses. Right? So some of them are very short. But today, we're going to see that some of the parables are clear and really kind of easy to understand, but some of them are not as easy to understand. In fact, there are some of the parables that when you read it, it's kind of like, what? I'm really confused here. Some of them are a little more challenging to understand. And as you will, it won't take long for you to see, today's story, today's parable might be one of those that seems a little confusing to you when we read through it. There's an English idiom, right? You understand the word idiom. It's an expression that we use. And an English idiom that maybe you've heard before. It's this: the good, the bad, and the... Now, well, you knew that one too well. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It means to give a comprehensive assessment of something. For instance, I might say, "Hey, I heard there's a situation going on at work today. Just give me the good, the bad, and the ugly." What do I mean by that? I mean, tell me everything that's going on. Give me a comprehensive assessment of the situation. Well, it's interesting that phrase, that expression, the good, the bad, and the ugly, actually came from a 1966 movie, a cowboy movie that some of the folks on the bottom floor here, they said, "You mean it's an expression? I didn't know it was an expression. That's a movie. That's a movie starring..." Worldly church, Randy, I tell you. I know all these worldly movies. Yes, Clint Eastwood. Now, I acknowledge, I have not seen the movie, don't know. So if this is wrong, I'm just telling you, this is what so you're going, what? Hey, that movie came out long before I was born. It did. It actually came out several months before I was born. So as I've read, right, the bad character in the movie is this ruthless killer, right? So no wonder he's called the bad. Seems like an appropriate description. The ugly character is this career criminal who's notorious for petty crimes, and so ugly seems like an appropriate description as well. But Clint Eastwood plays the good guy whose character is supposed to stand in contrast to the evil of the other two characters, right? The bad and the ugly and the good. The problem is the good guy in the movie is this greedy, manipulative, morally questionable cowboy who's only seems to be really good in comparison to the other two characters, the bad and the ugly. You say, what does that have to do with anything, Pastor? Hold on. I promise you it does. Because that's a little bit like today's parable. If you're looking for the good guy in the story, there's a guy and he's maybe kind of good compared to the other guy and compared to, but you're going to quickly recognize that wait, hold on. If he's supposed to be the good guy, and the problem with that is when we read the parables, we oftentimes read into it with a preconceived notion and idea. All right, so we're looking for, all right, so who represents God in this story? So if you're, when we read this, if you're looking for the character in the parable who represents God, you're going to be in trouble because you're going to say, wait, there's nobody in here that's really good. Yeah, you are correct. And there's a reason why. It's because the parable, the story, is not about the characters. It's about what all the characters have in common. And what they have in common is a love of money, a shrewdness about money, and a blindness to money. The story is about money. Now, you've heard me say before, one of the harshest criticisms that pastors take, and maybe it's justified based on the actions of some, but through the years, I've always heard this. People from outside the church say, if you go to church, all you're ever going to hear about is money. That's all the preachers ever talk about is money. Money, money, money. Well, just understand, it was inevitable. If I'm going to do a series about parables, it's inevitable that money was going to come up because 1/3 of all the parables that Jesus told were about money. So I could do one of two things. I could just avoid 1/3 of all the parables to keep from speaking about money, or I can just do it. Just rip the Band-Aid off, right? So I can't in good conscience go, you know what, I'm just going to avoid everything the Bible says about money because I don't want somebody to come in and think. Now, I can tell you, if you attend church here all the time, you know, we don't talk about money all the time. We go through the scriptures, but if the scriptures talk about money, we're not going to just skip over it. And this story is about money. So why so much emphasis on money? Why would 1/3 of all of his stories have to do with money? Well, I think the reason is simple. Money is a prominent issue in our everyday lives. The same thing was true in the first century. Money was a prominent issue in their lives then, and money is a prominent issue in our lives now. If you want to eat, it takes money, right? I mean, we all want to eat. Got to eat. It takes money to do it. If you need a new pair of shoes, guess what it's going to take? Money. If you don't want to wear out your new shoes and walk to where you want to go, it's going to take money. Right now, it takes more money than it did before. I told Janet, I showed her a picture. I stopped for gas this morning. My knees are still wobbling a little bit. It was like my little Hyundai. It took like $46, $47, whatever it was. I was like, if you don't want to walk, wear out your new shoes. It's going to take money. If you want a roof over your head, if you want something, if you want a tent even over your head, if you want a roof over your head, it's going to take money. By the way, it's approaching quickly. Where are all of our accountants? They sit up in the balcony up there. April 15 is approaching quickly, and that's an important date because you made money and the government wants it. You have a bank account because you need somewhere to safely keep your money. You have money to put in the bank account because you have a job that pays you money so you can buy shoes and pay for gas. It makes sense. Money's kind of a pretty prominent part of our everyday lives. So it makes sense that Jesus would address that subject, and he does in this particular parable. So I'm giving you fair warning. Hold on to your wallet or your purse, and let's dive into Luke 16. Are you ready? Okay. I left my wallet in the car. I didn't bring it in. I'm like, I know better. I've read this already. Luke 16. Janet's got it. Luke 16, beginning in verse number 1. Let's read this story together, and let's walk through it. And he, that of course is talking about Jesus, he also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward. Okay, hold on. We got to stop right there, because we really need to understand the terminology as we're going along. You can circle that word, underline it, highlight it, steward, right? So the word oikonomos, it means, it comes from, it's a really unique Greek word. It comes from two words. It means oikos, which is a house, nomos, or nemo, which means to arrange. So it is a manager, somebody who arranges, right, takes care of an estate or a household, a business manager. So in our culture, we probably would be more inclined to think and understand the word manager. It's really what it's talking about here. And so we'll kind of interchange that. In fact, we'll just use that word for sake of understanding for us, a manager. He also said to the disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a manager, and an accusation was brought to him that this manager, was wasting his goods. All right, we got to stop there because there's another really important word here. You can underline or circle the word wasting. Wasting. Diaskopidzo is the Greek word. It's a farming term. It means like to scatter in its most general sense, but think in terms of when it's used in the negative sense, it means to scatter and to waste. So you can imagine if you're scattering seed and you're going, hey, this is expensive stuff, and they're just throwing it everywhere. You ever had your kids or your grandkids and they're playing with something or whatever it is, and you're wasting that. You're getting it everywhere. That's the word here. It's interesting because this same word, diascorpidzo, this wasting, this word, Jesus had just used this word in Luke 15 in another story that he told that you're probably way more familiar with than the one that we're going through. That story that he used this same word in was the story of the prodigal son. How many of you have ever heard of that parable? That's a favorite of a lot of people. But if you remember, in Luke chapter number 15 and verse number 13, Jesus, when he's telling that story of the prodigal son, he used this same word. Remember, the son comes to his father and he says, Father, give me my inheritance now. And the father gives him his inheritance, and he goes out, and the Bible says, Jesus said this, and he wasted his possessions, his inheritance, on riotous living, on prodigal living. So this is going to help us understand this word, or what's going on here in this story, because we get a little context. The prodigal son takes his entire inheritance and he goes out and he's just blowing it and he's spending it. Same word. Jesus uses it here. Only now he says there was a certain rich man who had a manager, and an accusation was brought to him that this manager was wasting his goods. So if we kind of connect the two, we kind of understand what this manager is doing, right? He's spending the boss's money like crazy. I mean, he's throwing wild parties and he's just having a good old time. That's the word. And, isn't it nice to know that when you study the Bible, not much has changed in 2,000 years? Because there's not a chance that we would ever see somebody who wrongly takes company money or the boss's money and uses it in a wrong way, right? We would never see that today. Back in 2005, some of these stories just amaze me. Back in 2005, there was a guy by the name of Dennis Kozlowski. He was the CEO of a company called Tyco International. Tyco International specialized in like security systems and fire protection systems, but that's not what Kozlowski was remembered for now. Kozlowski was using Tyco money for his own personal extravagant life, including, this is awesome, and I don't want to offend you this morning if you have one of these, but when everything came out, what he was using company funds for, he was, like one of the most notorious things was he had bought a $6,000 shower curtain for his New York City apartment. Now listen, no judging here. If you have a $6,000 shower curtain, it was like a whole list of things. The guy threw a $2 million birthday party for his wife, and he held it on this exclusive remote island in Italy. I would tell you about the birthday party, but I can't because it's not age appropriate for the kids that we have in the auditorium this morning. Of the $2 million that he spent on his wife's birthday party, $1 million of it was Tyco funds, company money. You say, what's the point? We see the same thing Jesus was describing still to this day. Here's a rich man who had a manager, and accusations were brought to him that the manager was wasting his goods, wasting money. So look at verse number 2. So he called him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be a steward." Let me put that into the Riley translation. Turn in all your account records because you're fired. That's what he tells him. Right? Hey, that makes sense, right? You've been wasting. I don't know, maybe the guy had a $6,000 shower curtain. I don't know what all he was doing, but he's wasting and he's using the rich man's money in order to live the best life now. He's having a great time. But it catches up to him. He's fired. Turn in all your accounts. You can imagine at that moment he's like, the good thing for him, apparently from the story, is he did not have all the account records with him. So he's like, I'll get those for you right away. Look at verse 3. And then the steward, the manager, said within himself, "Oh, what shall I do? What am I going to..." This is there's some important turning points in this story that we're going to come back to and talk to you later. One of them is here in verse number 3, when it says the steward said within himself. Remember this because we're going to come back to this. What shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. Now notice how far he's about to fall. He says, I cannot dig and I am ashamed to beg. He knows that his reputation and his character will be tarnished in such a way when this comes out, when his boss fires him, when everybody he's not going to just change companies. He's not going to go, the next CEO down the road's not going to hire him when he finds out why he got fired. He anticipates that this is going to knock him all the way down from being the manager of all this company's resources to having to either dig ditches or beg. He's expecting a long fall. And by the way, he doesn't really desire either of those things. Imagine that. He doesn't want to dig ditches and he doesn't want to beg. Well, I'm not surprised at all. He's been living a pretty good life. So he devises a plan. Look at verse number 4, and this is another important phrase that we're going to look at. He said in verse 4, I have resolved what to do. I know what to do. Now, the word that's translated here, there's a lot of Greek words that are translated to know or to understand. Gnosko, the word that is used here, it means to know something through experience. there are some things that I know, and I know them because I've read it. I know it because I've heard it. But there's a difference between knowing something because you've read about it or because you've heard about it, and knowing something because you have experienced it. That's the word that Jesus uses here. The man says, I know what to do. I have experienced through life. I know, I've seen, I've watched. I know what to do in this situation. That when I am put out of the stewardship, oh, this is so important, they may receive me into their houses. All right, so here's what he's going to do. He's going to leverage his present situation for future profit. Smart, right? I mean, this case is like, oh, life experience has taught me what to do here. I'm not just going to roll over and cry and feel sorry for myself. I know how to get myself out of this situation. I know what to do. I've seen this before. I'll take this situation and I'll leverage it and I'll use it to secure my future. The guy is crooked, but he's not dumb. He's shrewd. In fact, we're going to see this word shrewd in a minute. Verse number 5. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And verse number 6, and he said, 100 measures of oil. And so he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly. Hey, we got to move fast on this. I don't have a lot of time. If you'll act now, I can save you some money. Quickly, right now, take out the bill and write 50. You no longer owe the boss 100. You only owe 50. And then he said to another, verse number 7, and how much do you owe? And so he said 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. Verse number 8, so the master, now here's where we're going to come across this huge question mark. Because if you think, and oftentimes when we study the parables, when you see the rich man, or you see, it's sometimes it's representative. Oh, okay, I understand. This is God in the story here. If you're looking at that, you're going to struggle a little bit when you get to verse number 8, because verse number 8 says, "So the master commended." The word means to applaud. The master commended the unjust steward, this crooked manager. The master commends him because he had dealt shrewdly. Now we're going to begin to really dial into the point of the story. Notice the latter part of verse number 8. Jesus says, "For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light." Now, before we continue on, let's talk about this word shrewdness, because Jesus uses this word and interjects this shrewdness, phronomos. It means prudent or sensible or wise in a practical way. So the parable uses with this word shrewdness about this manager, of this unjust, crooked manager. Why? Well, look at what he does. Number one, like you said, he leverages the situation. But notice how every detail of these verses shows us his shrewdness. Like, for instance, did you ever read through and wonder, why did he discount the oil 50%, right? You owe 100, write 50. But he only discounts the wheat 20%. He said, you owe 100, write down 80. Every detail of the story is showing us the shrewdness of this crooked manager. For instance, he knows that in their culture, by the way, when it says oil, it's not talking about crude oil like what we would think. It's talking about olive oil. So when you see olive oil, understand Jesus' listeners would have known this. They would have understood exactly what oil he was talking about. Olive oil, and by the way, it's still true to this day, olive oil is a valuable commodity, right, in Israel. He understands, hey, listen, wheat, yeah, that's wheat's pretty important. But olive oil Olive oil is very important. So even when he's giving, why is he giving a 50% discount for the oil and only a 20% discount for the wheat? Everything that he's doing is shrewdness. He's going, hey, the guy who's in the oil, I want to be even better in with him, because he's in an industry that who knows? I want to make sure he's got a lot of connections, and I want to make sure that if I need something, he's more important to me than the guy who's in wheat. Everything about this, all the details of the story are all pointing to this word shrewdness. He is shrewdly leveraging his boss's resources in a calculated way to prepare for his own future. So look at verse 9. Now we're past the story, and Jesus says, okay, so let's talk about the point. Let's talk about why I told the story. Verse 9, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. Now, admittedly, verse 9 is a difficult verse. It's kind of difficult to understand. Part of that is because the phrasing of it, no doubt, there are times when you cross over into different languages and you cross over into different cultures, sometimes when you're translating, sometimes it's easy to make that transition. Other times it's not quite as easy. And verse number 9 is one of those where you got to work a little bit to understand this. So allow me to just jump ahead and let me read to you verse 9 from the Amplified Bible, because the Amplified Bible, I think, really captures, without me having to spend 15 minutes explaining all of it, the Amplified Bible is going to really capture the meaning of what this verse is. So here's what verse 9 says in the Amplified Bible. And I tell you, learn from this, make friends for yourselves for eternity by means of the wealth of unrighteousness. That is, use the material resources that you have as a way to further the work of God, so that when it runs out, and it will, your material resources will run out. Eventually, you're going to die. You're going to leave all that behind. When it runs out, they will welcome you into the eternal dwellings. Now you kind of understand, okay, I get what Jesus is saying here. I understand what he's telling them. Then look at verse 10. He who is faithful, now he's really going to get to the point of the story. He who is faithful in what is least, underline that, circle that, what is least, because we've got to stop right there. Because I don't know that this manager would have thought of all of the incredible resources available to him, all the money, all the treasures, all the wealth. I don't know that we would think of all the treasures and the wealth of this world that we have, all the beautiful houses and the nice cars and the bank accounts and everything else that we have, all the luxuries. I don't know that we would ever think of those as the least. But so Jesus said, he who is faithful in what is least, this is nothing, is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in, there it is again, what is least, is unjust also in much. As is so often the case, the parables take the way that we typically think and turn it over on its head. Just how we think in life in general, how we find ourselves thinking, the things that we look to and the things that we think are important. And so often when Jesus tells a parable, one of the things that the parables, so many of them have in common, is it takes our thinking and just turns it upside down. Look at verse number 11. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon. All right, so we got to go back, because here's this word used again, this phrasing. So let's go back again and see what unrighteous mammon is. Verse number 9. Remember, we said in the Amplified, that's the material resources that you have. All right, so therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, the earthly material resources that God has given to you. It's not just money, it's all the things that God has given to you. If you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? Now, if we just stopped right there and think about it, people praying, God, just give me faith. Just give me faith, Lord. Why would God entrust true riches? Why would God entrust kingdom riches to you if you haven't been faithful with what He's given you to manage in this earthly sense? Go like this, if that makes sense. Okay. I mean, I don't want a whole church full of bobbleheads, but every now and then, just some indication that you're with me is like real good. Verse 12, and if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? Verse 13, no servant can serve two masters. Now he's just going to cut to the chase. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. And then we get to the final closing thought. You cannot serve God and mammon. Keyword serve. We all have things that God has entrusted to us, but you can't serve God and serve mammon. The word means treasure and wealth and riches and money. Now, we know that he's specifically talking about money because look at verse number 14. Now the Pharisees, look at the next line, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him. So, two important things in that verse 14. Pharisees, lovers of money. And then how do they react to it? They loved this story so much. They derided. The word derided him in verse 14, it means to scoff and to mock. But specifically, it means to do it in a visual way. Have you ever had a time where you're kind of mocking, but you're doing it under your breath? You know, somebody says something and you're walking away and you're going, yeah, that's what you think. You said it just loud. You're mocking them. And you said it just enough that you heard it. You're hoping maybe they did, maybe they didn't. You're mocking. But this word that that the Bible tells us that the Pharisees, how they derided, it means to mock in such a way that it's all over your face. In fact, it is a mocking that is primarily the expression on your face. So Jesus gets done and he says, here's this story about this crooked manager. He completes the whole story and he says, here's the point. You can't love God and money. And then the verse now tells us, and the Pharisees who were lovers of money derided him. So put your best mocking face on, right? You know, you can imagine there's like, I shudder to... I shudder to make any kind of facial expressions because whenever I do something, it's not uncommon for those images to be captured later by members of my family and posted into our family chat for all to chuckle and laugh at. So I can stand up here and preach for 40 minutes and at one point do something like this, and somehow that winds up. But I have to do it because this is what the point is. This is they're like just mocking and making faces, and they're like, please. Now, remember, it's interesting. If you go back to verse number 1, the Bible tells us who was Jesus talking to when he told this story. Look back at verse number 1. Who was Jesus talking to? And he also said to his disciples. So it's interesting to me that Luke points out that Jesus is speaking to the disciples here, but somehow by the end of the story, the Pharisees are listening in. The religious leaders of the time are listening in. No doubt. You ever had somebody that it's just like They're going to be in the middle of any conversation that is happening. Right? You ever known somebody like that? I mean, whatever it is, what'd you say? What? You know, just like quietly listening in the background. So it's amazing to me how every time Jesus, I'm sure that the Pharisees were drawn in because they hear a story about money. They love money. Hey, he's teaching about money. Let's hear what he has to say. So it's interesting that the story starts out with Jesus talking to the disciples, but it ends, right, with the Pharisees mocking. It kind of makes you wonder, Jesus, who knows all things, maybe this story was actually intended for the Pharisees to begin with. So let's go back and look at what's the takeaway from this story. Is it just about money? Is it what are? And so I really kind of wanted to show us really 4 simple principles this morning out of this parable, out of this story. If you want to jot them down, here's the first one. It teaches us, don't think only about today and completely neglect eternity. This is so easy to happen. We just get wrapped up in what's going on. We get wrapped up in the things of today. Especially when it comes to money, and that is the context of this particular story. This guy had lived every day. Think about this. He had lived every day thinking only about the present and not the future. Clearly, he was not thinking about the future when he was spending the boss's money. He's just thinking for today. Man, this is great. I'm having a great time. He's wasting. You're not thinking about the future if you are living every day wasting the boss's money. You're not thinking about, hey, one day I could get caught. He's not. He's thinking and living only for today. And the reason why is because of money. Mammon, wealth, and the pleasures that money brings had so consumed and corrupted his mind that he forgot all about the accountability of his life. He's just out spending like everything is his and there's no tomorrow. But then everything comes crashing down. Now, the same guy who was thinking only about each day, this is why I said, mark this in the text. There's some important turning points. He has this moment of contemplation in verse number 3 when he says, he said within himself. There's this moment of contemplation. He starts thinking about the future. So here's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, even this crooked manager had an aha moment when he saw the reality of the situation, and he stopped thinking only about the present and he focused on the future. But sadly, can I tell you, many Christians never have that same aha moment. They come to church and they hear sermon after sermon, and they read the Bible, and and somehow it never connects enough for them to have an aha moment in their life where they say within themselves, wow, I've been only thinking about today. I've been only living for today. I need to think about eternity. They treat their time and their money like it's all that matters. So the first lesson that we see is it's easy to think only about today and completely neglect eternity, especially when it comes to money. How often are we thinking only of the moment and not thinking of eternity when it comes to mammon, when it comes to money? So here's the second principle that we see from this story. Number 2, it urges us, it pushes us to, number 2, remember that what you have is not really yours. We are managers of what belongs to God. I mean, this is like, what could be more clear from this story? This guy has completely forgotten. He's out spending and utilizing all of these resources like they're his, wasting them like they're his. They're not his. Not only did the crooked manager live for the present while neglecting the future, he viewed all the resources that he had as being his own when they were not. Remember how the story began? There was a certain rich man who had a steward, a manager. He seems to have forgotten his role. He was not the rich man with all the resources. He was the manager. Now, it's interesting to me that in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 10, the Bible uses this same word that's translated steward or manager. It uses the same word, only here's what it says in 1 Peter 4:10. Christians are to be, listen to the phrasing, good stewards, same word, of the manifold grace of God. In other words, everything God gives us is a token of His grace, and we are to be good managers of what belongs to Him. Paul uses the same word, 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 2. Paul wrote, it is required in stewards, same word, managers. It's required in managers that a man be found faithful. You see, the thing that we see all through Scripture, this point that this is what the manager forgot, and this is what we forget. Psalm 24:1, it couldn't be any more clear than this. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. See, we tend to forget, yeah, but this is mine. Nothing we have is ours. Scripture, God created it. He owns it. It's His. I am not the owner. I am the manager. 1 Chronicles 29:14 reminds us, listen to this, all things come from God. I'm not the owner. I'm the manager. Job 41:11. God said this to Job, everything under heaven is mine. I'm not the owner, I'm the manager. James 1:17, every good and perfect gift is from above. I'm not the owner, I'm the manager. That's probably a really good phrase for us to write someplace. I don't know if we stitch it on a wallet or a purse, or we put it on a checkbook, or we put it at the top of our online bank, whatever it is. I'm not the owner, I'm the manager. It's the point of the story. Remember that what you have is not really yours. We are managers of what belongs to God. Somewhere along the line, this guy forgot. He began to see everything that he had as his. Hey, I can just do this and I can do that. He forgot. He's not the owner, he's the manager. By the way, this is a repeating theme in Jesus' parables. What you have is not really yours. We are managers of what belongs to God. So here's the third principle that I think we see from this parable. It tells us, this is what it pushes us to do. Number 3, use the resources you have today to make an eternal difference for others. Use the resources that don't belong to me anyway. I'm a manager over these things, and my highest priority should be, how do I use the resources, how do I manage the resources that belong to God that He's given to me to glorify Him by making an eternal difference? This is when we get to that verse. When the rich man commends, right, he applauds the crooked manager. The crooked manager was shrewd to use what he had today to help secure his own future. That's earthly wisdom. Earthly wisdom is not always all wrong and all bad. That's a 401k. That's an IRA. That's a savings account. There's nothing wrong with any of those. It's good earthly wisdom to use what you have today to prepare for your own future. But earthly wisdom says do that. Spiritual wisdom is using what you have today for the eternal future of others. Remember, verse 9 said, use the material resources you have now to further the work of God so that it makes an eternal difference. That is what the story is pointing to. When you give generously and faithfully, here at First Coast, you are using the resources you have today to make an eternal difference for others. I love the fact that we're tackling this story just coming off of the past several weeks that we've had. Last week, you heard directly. You sat in this auditorium during our second hour, and you heard directly from a young couple sent out of our church who are serving in North Africa and who are sharing the gospel with people in a Muslim country. Right? In terms of, okay, and the amazing thing is, we look at it and you think, well, who there would want to hear the gospel? No, this is the incredible thing about the gospel. It's compelling to everyone. And so here they are in a place where they have to be careful how they do that. But do you realize that it is your dollars? Do you realize that it is your using of your resources that God has entrusted to you, not yours because you own them, yours because God has given them to you to manage for Him. And as you give of that, you are making an eternal difference in the lives of others in a country on the other side of the world. You'll never get past this concept of, oh, I have to tithe. I beg you, get in the Word of God, and you will so quickly lose that whole concept. You will no longer see giving as something that you have to do. Oh, I have to give 10%, or whatever it is. You will come to see everything that I have. I'm a manager of it. Right? I don't own any of this. You don't have anything in your possession that you're going to take with you when you leave this earth. No. And by the way, I've seen this happen time and time again. You say, yes, but I'm building up wealth so that I can give to the next generation. And they will waste it and blow through it so fast. What you spent decades acquiring will take days. Such is the nature of life, right? When you look at it and you say, you know what? What God has given to me, He's given to me to manage, not to hoard, not to act like it's mine, to do it as I please. And, oh, there's certainly earthly wisdom. Is there anything wrong with doing things to provide for your future? Absolutely not. But if you're employing only earthly wisdom and there's no spiritual wisdom, then there's nothing in your heart telling you, hey, what about eternity? What am I doing to make a difference in eternity? 3 weeks ago, you sat right here and we heard from Greg and Wendy Mann. Greg and Wendy are missionaries in Guyana, South America. You listened and you heard what they're doing. And you think of that, all of the different churches throughout the jungles that they've established in the time that they've been there, reaching 1,000 people in all of these various churches. When you know what you're doing? When you give here, when you give to the mission and the vision of First Coast, which is to reach people with the gospel here in our city and around the world, you are managing wisely. You are taking resources that God has given to you, and you're making a difference for eternity. 3 weeks ago, we hosted a Discover Luncheon where people can ask questions, and a young lady trusted Jesus Christ as her personal Savior in that luncheon. The money you have and you give today is making an eternal difference, but money is not the only resource God gives us now to make a difference in eternity. God gives us not just money as the resource, but what about time? God gives us time. How you give of your time can make an eternal difference. Well, Pastor, I wish I had time to serve, but I just don't. Actually, we all have the same amount of time. I always chuckle when somebody presents it like, well, I just don't have as much time. If you do the math on it, I admit over and over, I'm not the math guy, I know, but I think I think if you add it all up, it's going to be the same for all of us, same amount of time. The problem is not difference in time, the problem is difference in priorities. Not just money and time. God gives us other resources. He gives us gifts and abilities and talents to give back to Him to make an eternal difference. Jesus' point was that if the lost pagan world around us is wise enough to use the resources they have today to secure their own future, how much more should a Christian use the resources that God has given to them to make a difference in eternity? That's the point of the story. So here's the last truth from verse number 13. You can use money to glorify God or be enslaved by money through your own desires. This is the reason why you can imagine get to the end and the Pharisees are like, give me a break. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's one or the other. Because I'm sure they thought, nobody is more loyal to God than we are. Our love for money hasn't inhibited our serving of God in any way, shape, or form. So Jesus just cut straight through all of their pride, and He says, you can't serve both. You can use money to glorify God or be enslaved by money through your own desires. You cannot serve God and mammon. That's the summary statement that He makes. So it brings us to this question that we have to ask ourselves and say, okay, number one, do I have a healthy view of things? Do I have a healthy view of money, a healthy view of resources, a healthy view of time? Do I have a healthy view of this to remember that none of it is mine? All of it belongs to the Lord and He has given it to me. Then number two, how am I managing what He has given me? What kind of a manager am I? Have I had that? And by the way, I hope this morning, my prayer this morning, I prayed it this week. God, I pray that in today's service, somebody who needs it will have the same aha moment that the manager had, where all of a sudden he hits him and he's like, he reasons within himself and he's like, I know what I need to do. I hope somebody this morning, God works in your heart where you have an aha moment. And it's not just another sermon, another parable, but that God speaks to you and you come to realize nothing that I have is mine. I'm a manager and I want to use the resources God has given to me to manage, and I want to do it in a way that glorifies Him and makes a difference for eternity. They say, and by the way, I can't specifically, we're talking about giving because the parable is about money, but this extends in so many different directions. God may be speaking to you. You say, I'm already giving. God may be speaking to you about something else in your life that He's saying, I want you to, you have come to look at this and think of this as something that is yours and for you, and I want you to have a more healthy understanding of this. I want you to be a better manager of this. We need some aha moments to change stories into action, to change our hearts and lives. Here's the big idea, and we're done this morning. Everything we have now was given to us by God. So being good managers of those resources means using them to make an eternal difference. How are you using what God has given you to make a difference in eternity?